Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
My Wife and the Werewolves. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I got a Dogman story for you. Actually, it was a whole pack of them that we had to deal with that night. This was years back, one of the first times I had ever gone camping with my wife. We were in some fairly deep woods off-road in the area that my wife Dolores had grown up camping in. She calls it the Hatton Triangle, as its southeasternmost point is Hatton, Michigan. Draw a straight line from there to Lake George to the northwest, and you found the top point of the triangle. Make a beeline from there down to tiny Lake Michigan, and you found the third corner of Dolores's Hatton Triangle. Did she define and name this place because it was known to be a hot spot for cryptids? Nope. That's just the area her dad liked to take her family camping in when she was growing up, that's all. She told me she never saw anything strange in those woods at all, and I believe she means it. But by the time I'm done telling you this story, I'm not sure what your opinion will be of her statement. Now, Dolores' dad liked this area because although I do think there are some official camping areas in there, there are also some off-trail locations you can sneak a night or two of free camping at, if you're lucky, and if you keep a low profile. So my wife was brought up camping with no fire, inside thick patches of trees instead of in clearings. There are a lot of bugs and things that live in trees, and they think you're weird if you want to sleep with them. They come down out of the trees and they try to bite you to see if you're good to eat. The same can be said of camping in a clearing, but at least there you can make a fire, and you can keep some of these blood-sucking little animals from having their way with you. My wife was told by her dad that fires are bad. Why? Well, fires let the property owner know that you're camping illegally on their land. That's why fires are bad, see? My wife has an interesting family. So, okay, we were someplace in the Hatton Triangle that was so dense with vegetation that we ended up just hanging up a hammock between trees since there wasn't enough room to put up our little tent. Dolores calls it sleeping under the stars, but the tree cover was so heavy I couldn't even see as many stars as I'd see back in the city. The two of us settled uncomfortably into the hammock, and I tried to sleep, as my wife snored loudly. I was terrified to be there, and I was being eaten alive by all these things that made me itch. It was horrible. I do know that I fell asleep because I woke up needing to relieve myself. As I climbed gingerly out of the hammock, trying not to wake Dolores up, I noticed that all the loud bug noises had stopped. I thought that was strange, but I figured bugs need to sleep sometimes, and I guess this was that time. I kept stepping on sharp rocks in my bare feet, and I staggered around looking for a good tree to hydrate. I did my business with my eyes closed, enjoying the sense of relief washing over me. Then I zipped up and turned around to walk back to the hammock, except that I couldn't, because there was a group of men there. Or maybe they weren't men. They stood like men. I felt like I must be dreaming, and I got very annoyed at myself, shaking my head sharply and trying to make these figments of my imagination go away. I thought I was seeing hairy, dog-headed men in front of me, and I didn't want to see them anymore. Instead of going away, the dog-headed, furry, man-like creatures advanced upon me. Not in a hostile way, but in a curious one. I froze in place as they began to sniff me all over, which tickled just as much as the large bugs landing on me in the hammock had. I started trying to look closer since these dream images were only becoming more real, not less. I seemed to be being smelled by a family of creatures. I could see by their fur patterns and colorings that they were related to each other. They ranged in size from a bit taller than me down to the size of a teen or tween, and they were all up on their hind legs. They had paws that were very nearly hands, and that to me defines them as a separate species from either bear or wolf. I would say that their paws were more like those of a bear than those of a wolf, but they were not so flat, and the dew claw was long and set in a position similar to how our human thumbs are placed. They picked and pulled at the bottom of my t-shirt, watching it fall back into place and not understanding the point of why I had pulled this rag over my torso. They were like cavemen from an old movie, but with heads sort of like a wolf mixed with a Scottish terrier. No matter what my wife says, these were another kind of species. These were not wolves, not coyotes, not bears, not dogs, and not human. But they had some qualities of each of those categories. Even though I had just finished doing so, I suddenly felt like I had to go to the bathroom again. I also felt like I was getting nauseous. I just wanted to go back to the hammock and go back to sleep. I wondered if maybe I might really be back there, still asleep, and then all this could disappear when I actually woke up. At some point, the dog-headed men all seemed satisfied that they had smelled enough of me, and they sort of took a step back and sat down to watch me. They were still blocking my path back to the hammock, but now they were seated like dogs on the ground, and I could look over them back toward camp. I started to say something like "nice doggies" when they all moved their ears back and bared their teeth. I could feel a sensation on the bottoms of my feet, and then I understood that it was these creatures deeply growling that was shaking the ground underneath me. Needless to say, I stopped talking. After I was quiet for a while, they calmed down a bit, and the growling stopped. Once they felt more relaxed, one of the creatures started to groom his privates, and I slipped past them quietly, heading back slowly toward camp, but keeping my eyes on the monsters. The wolfmen did not growl this time, but they did get up and curiously follow me. I was so tired that I walked on a bit closer to camp before stopping. I realized I couldn't bring these monsters over to the hammock where my wife was sleeping. Even if it meant I had to spend the night in the woods getting growled at, it was still better than placing Dolores' life in danger. Remembering that there was something more important than me gave me a bit more energy, and I resolved to wait this out, no matter how long it took. But my absence in the hammock had disturbed my wife, and she was now awake. I heard her call for me, and all the big canines stood up at attention, like monstrous meerkats, and they stared back in the direction of her voice. I was afraid to call back to her, since they had bared their teeth at me the last time I spoke. Getting myself killed wasn't going to help my wife out, so I decided to play the waiting game. The dogman started making whining sounds and pacing in circles as my wife continued to call out to me. Dolores got impatient and decided to walk toward the sounds that she was apparently hearing. She was going to walk right into the same situation I was in. I panicked, and I called out to her, telling her to stay away. Instantly, I had one creature's drooling mouth in my face, and two others pressed to either side of my exposed, vulnerable throat. And I shut the hell up mid-sentence. I was gonna lose everything, and I still wasn't gonna protect my wife. I was failing in every way as a man, and I braced myself for what was likely to come next. I could hear my wife loudly pushing her way into the woods, calling my name, and the dogman backed away from me, turning to watch her approach. When I saw her, my beautiful wife, the woman I love, I burst into tears, knowing that we were both about to lose everything. I drank in her loveliness for what I expected to be the final time, and with a choked voice I said, "I love you, Dolores." But Dolores wasn't looking at me. She was looking around in wide-eyed amazement at all the different-sized versions of this same kind of strange canine creature. And after looking them all over, she screamed out at the top of her lungs one single word: "Doggos!" Instantly, all the dogmen dropped down to all fours and gathered around her, wagging their tails so vigorously that they were slapping themselves in their own faces with their own tails and looking very silly in the process. My wife fussed loudly over the beastmen, who turned themselves so she could pet and rub each side of them. It was like they were old friends or something. I watched, stunned. You mean that would have been all I would have had to do? Watching her petting the giant doggos and being loved by them in return, I finally let down my guard. I wanted some of that dogman action too, so I walked over to the scene, hoping to pet an actual, feral dogman. The entire pack of them turned toward me as though they were one organism, baring their teeth and growling somewhat passionately. My wife began scolding me for sneaking up behind the Dogman. I told her I wasn't sneaking up behind anything, and she pointed back to camp and sternly told me, "Go back to sleep before you get them upset again." When I tried to respond, Dolores shouted to me, ordering me to stop antagonizing the doggos. This instantly brought big smiles and tail wags from my would-be Terminators, and they trotted over to her for more attention. I kept all this in my line of vision, and I walked backward toward the hammock. Dolores seemed to have it under control. She didn't need any help from me. In a few minutes, Dolores was back with me in the hammock. She started settling back to sleep without even saying goodnight. I tried asking her a question, but before I got a single word out, she told me that I had already cost her enough sleep, and that I should save my questions for the morning. So that was how I came to first start sarcastically calling her Mother Nature. In the morning I did question her, or at least I started to. She shut me down pretty quickly by refusing to acknowledge that those were Dogman or werewolves the night before. She just kept calling them doggos, as if they were pets belonging to the neighbors. She insisted they were just a big family of dogs, and that it was weird how much they liked to stand up and walk on their hind legs, and yeah, their front paws did seem more like hands than a dog paws should seem, but none of that meant they were a pack of dogmen. Just some perfectly normal, abnormal, large canines that walk upright and have paws that can pick things up in the way hands do. Nothing out of the ordinary about that. And it wasn't just that morning that she shut me down when we talked about all this. It was from then on. She would always say, "You just don't know how to act around animals," and walk away from me. In my opinion, it was Dolores' attitude toward the animals that protected her. It was because she was too asleep and too annoyed to even notice that these were carnivorous cryptids and that we were outnumbered. It's an interesting thing to me. I was scared of the creatures, and so they acted scary. Dolores was happy to see them, and so they were happy to see her. Where I saw monsters, I got monsters. Where she saw doggos, she got love. Dolores literally can't understand that these things could have eaten me for a late-night snack. She can't even conceive of that because to her, these were friendly puppy dogs. So what can I say? There's nothing else I can say about my wife and the werewolves. You've just seen the latest of our scary Dogman camping stories. I wouldn't emulate that guy, camping alone with his wife exposed like that in a territory that has predators and carnivores of all types, likely including predatory humans. The way I see it, if you're going to put yourself at risk out in nature, there is such a thing as safety in numbers. If you're camping alone, you're obviously far less safe than if you and your family or friends head out into Dogman turf with this 16-person mansion of a tent. This cool 3-wing tent is on sale by mail from Walmart at $100 off. The link to snag one at that discounted price is in the description. If you use that link, then allegedly this channel gets a small commission for each sale. And now it's time for another scary camping story featuring some Dogman. Dogman. In our campsite. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story for you of the most terrifying night of my life. I was trapped in my tent while a feral dogman circled me. Nothing is more scary than having a dogman in our campsite. So, my girlfriend from back then and I went camping way back in the mid-1990s. Either we didn't have cell phones or they didn't have cameras in them yet or something, because no, we didn't get any photos of what happened. All I can give you is my story, and here it is. Let's call my ex-girlfriend Bertha just as an in-joke. So, Bertha got up in the middle of the night, and when she did so, she woke me up by accident. We were sharing a tent. She told me she was going to go take a whiz, and I asked her if I should come stand guard. She thought the idea was stupid, that she was just going to do her business in the woods and go back to sleep. What could happen? I was tired enough that she sort of made sense to me, and I laid my head back down to rest. I couldn't go back to sleep, though, as I was waiting for Bertha to come back, which didn't happen, and then didn't happen, and finally continued to not happen. I got out of my sleeping bag cursing under my breath. I was really annoyed that this girl was making me do all this and put on my boots. Then I angrily unzipped the tent and stuck my head out to start to climb outside. I heard it before I saw it. There was a snarling kind of a sound, an angry canine sound. I looked up, and I saw it. As expected, it was a dog, but it was a big one, and it was black. It had long, pointed ears, I guess like a Doberman, but it was dark all over. As I watched, it rose from a sitting position, looking the way a dog would look when sitting, to a standing position, looking the way a man would look while standing, on its hind legs. My first impression was, this is the great god Anubis. I watched as its eyes glowed, and it stood taller than any man stands any place on this planet. Then the great god Anubis fell to all fours and raced toward my tent, saliva flying in the wind as it barked loudly and bared its teeth in a display of ferocity I will continue to remember even if I am reincarnated 27 times. Needless to say, I pulled my head back in that tent and zipped up. I could hear the huge dog sniffing and smelling the tent, circling it, and then circling it again. Bertha. Had this thing gotten Bertha? Or was she hiding from it, afraid to come back in the tent with the monster so near? I was praying for her to be okay, but really, not as much as I was praying for me to be okay, if you know what I mean. The sound of a large dog man smelling your tent is not a very pleasant one, and I was getting so nervous that I started to feel queasy. That was not a good development. I needed to hold things together. I focused on breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth, and I kept my mind off the walking mountain of doom circling me over and over. It took me a while to notice when the dogman had stopped sniffing around. Sometime in the middle of my meditation, it seemed to have walked off. I listened for what felt like a long time, and I didn't hear anything moving at all. Bracing myself, I thought this might be a good time for me to take a second look outside that tent. Boy, was that a mistake. The dogman was literally sitting there outside my zipper hole, waiting for me to do exactly what I was doing. Panicking, I pulled back in the tent, but this time I was zipping up while screaming and trying to keep the animal out and myself in. Even after the zipper was up, I kept screaming like a woman at that monster. I was telling it to go away. I was saying all sorts of angry things at it, as though it could understand English. In short, I was pathetic. I finally found my true calling, and that is to be prey for a large land predator. I was disgusted with myself and worried about Bertha, but mainly, I was trying not to be ill inside that tent. My head hurt as I woke up and someone was screaming at me. I had been so unconscious that I wasn't even remembering who I was at first, and it took me some time to realize that I recognized that voice shouting at me. It was Bertha. Bertha! I got up and unzipped the tent. It was starting to get light out. The morning had arrived. I wondered when I had fallen asleep and looked around to see if I had been sick. It seems I hadn't been. Poor Bertha had spent the night hiding in the woods, watching the dogman circle our tent. It turns out she saw it before it saw or smelled her, and she was able to stay upwind of it or downwind, or whichever of those two is the preferable one. It turns out I was lucky she was the one out there and not me, because I wouldn't have known to hide my scent the way she knew. Once Bertha figured out I wasn't hurt, she laid into me on what a coward I was, forcing her to sleep outside in the cold. Like I was supposed to somehow save her from the great god Anubis? How would I do that exactly? Should I have used my enchanted Green Lantern ring? Or maybe I should have shouted Shazam? Bertha told me she wanted to date a bigger and more protective man than me, and we soon went back to being just friends. Later, she married this pipsqueak half her size, and she bossed him around until he expired from the exertion. So much for bigger and more protective. I'm just glad that old Bertha and I managed to survive. Dogman. In our campsite.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
The Dogman spoke to us at length. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when I was a teenager, I went on a retreat with a group of people who at the time I thought were a religious group, but I've since learned that they were technically a cult. I mean, they were pretty benign for a cult. They never made us drink the Kool-Aid or anything like that. In fact, they fell apart and reformed into a few different groups after the night when the Dogman showed up in our camp and spoke to us at length. A number of people I've told about this inform me that I must have been talking with a werewolf, or else a shaman, or a shapeshifter, who took a form like a werewolf. He did speak in a way that was similar to a Native American man that I knew at the time, but that man lived in my town, not out in the woods. He also wasn't covered in fur, and he didn't have tall, pointed dog ears on top of his head either. This character did. I don't think it was anyone I knew in disguise. Maybe it was someone with a similar accent or way of talking to my native friend. Maybe it really was a medicine man or shaman of some sort. But why did he choose to appear to us in such a strange and terrifying form? I mean, we didn't stay to listen to him because we wanted to. We stayed and listened because we were horrified by his presence, and we were literally too scared to run. At least sitting there around the campfire, we'd be able to see him if he made any moves to hurt anyone. Also, there were 5 of us and only 1 of him, so if we held together by the fire, we'd have a better chance if a conflict arose than if we split up and ran through the woods. Now, before the thing or man or spirit or whatever it was arrived, we were gathered around the campfire, and we were at the point in the night when we were telling scary stories to each other. This was not the entire group. It was one of the elders and 4 of us newbies. She had been teaching us basics of their philosophy, and now we were relaxing with toasted marshmallows and ghostly tales. We were feeling friendly and enjoying each other's company. And then suddenly, the person next to me gasped, and I looked up to see a man in a furry costume approaching us. At least that's what it looked like to me at first. This was the early 1990s, and I had not heard of furries or cosplay yet. So I'm sort of using modern words to describe what happened that night. To be as clear as possible, I thought it was a costume, but I don't mean to say I thought it was a member of this or that community. I thought it was a lone nut, dressing that way to scare us. I stood up in alarm and confusion, unsure if I wanted to run or confront this weirdo coming over out of the blue in the dark. The guy held his hands up in front of himself as if to urge me to calm down. It also seemed to be to signal that he carried no weapon and meant no harm. For some reason it didn't make the hair on my arms go down though. Maybe it was the extreme length and weird pointiness of his fingers. Or it might have been the way his face jutted out into a long snout, like the face of a wolf or coyote or something. It could also have been his tall dog-like ears up on top of his head, which seemed to twitch and move on their own. This cosplay costume was certainly a sophisticated one. By that point, everyone was standing up and backing away a bit from the fire and the creature. While we had been seated around the flames, we were all on one side now, with him on the other. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I did not expect it to be anything good. The guy sort of kneeled in this way on one knee, and he began to tell us about how he was picking up our teaching where it had been left off. He called our teacher by name, as though she knew about the fact that he was going to be arriving. She looked back at all of us in confusion, making it clear that she didn't know any more about what was going on than we did. So my mind next went to the theory that this was a psychotic, costumed person who had been stalking us, or at least our teacher, for quite a period of time before that night. My blood ran cold at the implications of that part of it. Whatever this guy was planning to do, it seemed he had been planning it for some time. The weird thing about the way he spoke was that his dog lips seemed to be pronouncing the words. They were far more flexible than a dog's mouth's lips should be, and also more flexible than a mask would have been. It was as if I were looking at a dog's mouth adapted to speaking human language, and as I stated earlier, pronouncing each word in an accent similar to that of my Native American acquaintance from my youth. I wish I knew what people's accent I'm referring to, but I grew up in Wisconsin, so I think that would narrow it down somewhat. Let's say he spoke in a Midwestern native accent. His teeth were not the long fangs you describe in a lot of the episodes on your channel. This guy's bridge work looked very human, just extended into a long snout. Most of the teeth were fairly short and blunted, like ours, with only a few that ended in sharp points. If this was a real animal, it was most likely an omnivore, like a human being. It didn't seem as though it could have been a costume, so it was either a real creature, or a shape-shifting medicine man, or some kind of holographic projection or a shared hallucination or something like that. I mean, I guess I would have to vote for number 1 or number 2. I think it was a real something. I just don't know exactly what I mean by that. I mean, it took up space and it was alive and it breathed air, in my opinion. I can't prove that, though. If it was an illusion, it was a masterful one. This individual referred to himself as Dogman, and spoke to us each in turn, following no order that was apparent to me. I remember he called me by name, and he told me a story from my childhood, about 10 years prior to that night. He told me about something I had nearly forgotten myself, about a bully who beat me up in front of my own father. My dad said he was disgusted with me, so instead of breaking up the fight, he drove home. As a result, I got beat up worse. Then, I got laughed at by a bunch of kids and one teacher as I trudged home, where my father once again communicated his disappointment in me. You can sort of understand why I would block something like this out. As the Dogman told that story, the kids around me at the fire kinda snickered at me. But then that Dogman told me that he had been there on that day, and he had seen the entire thing. And so, he decided to heal the bully on my behalf. He sat there looking at me as though expecting a reaction. I didn't know what his words even meant. Healing the bully on my behalf. And so I didn't know how I should react. Thinking back on it, I had expected that kid to bully me more and more, after he basically got encouraged to by my father. Instead, I hardly remember running into him at all after that. He didn't get into any trouble for what he'd done, and yet he didn't seem to bother me any more after it. He wasn't nice to me either, we just avoided each other. I hadn't thought too much about that until the Dogman said he'd healed my bully. This, I have to say, put me in a weird mood, and I joked that he should have healed my dad instead. The Dogman responded by asking me what my father did after that day. I thought about it, and what he did was he had one of his army buddies come over to our place on Saturdays, and then the two of them basically pushed me around a lot. This was their way of teaching me how to fight back. In the beginning, it was solely pushing me around, though. It took a long time before I started learning anything, but the Dogman was right. My father was no longer abandoning me in disgust. Now he was forcing me to get tougher, whether I liked it or not. Of course I hated it, but in retrospect what he did made my adult life a little bit less horrible. I never got as tough as him and his buddy, but I didn't get pushed around at school anymore. I'm a suspicious type of person, and so I sat there, trying to figure out how the Dogman really found out all that stuff about my childhood and my father, and so forth. I also wondered if this was actually part of the training of this group, or cult, to pretend to have a mystical spirit of the woods invade camp and tell stories that he should not be able to know. The thing is, this all could have been the result of spying into the family history of each of us new recruits. It seemed to me that it could be some kind of carnival trickery designed to dazzle and amaze us into becoming lifetime members of whatever it was they wanted us to join. Instead, though, the more I saw my fellows become amazed, the more suspicious I got. Yet no matter how much I wanted to think that this was some kind of scam, I couldn't figure out certain parts of it, like how the man had a dog head, or how that dog head was able to speak so clearly in English, and even with that specific accent. The fingers almost remind me now of the Grinch live-action movie that came out long after this event, with their length and furry nature. It looked like some kind of a fictional creature, but I was watching it move and breathe and listening to it speak. After bamboozling us with what were either genuine stories of how he had known each of us for a long time and had mitigated problems in our lives from afar, or else evidence of all of us being spied on, the Dogman moved to the miracles in front of our eyes portion of the show. He asked if he could have a marshmallow to put on the end of a long twig that he had picked up off the forest floor. Someone gave him one, and he poked the end of the stick through it. Just before putting the marshmallow into the fire to toast it, however, he pulled it back and reconsidered. "I don't think I want to toast a marshmallow," he said to nobody in particular. "I want to toast a nice big piece of salmon." Then he thrust the stick into the fire, and it sizzled and sparked so that I had to hold my hand in front of my face. The flame got too hot and too big, but only for a short moment. Then it died back down to normal, but we were all wiping soot off of ourselves and allowing our eyes to readjust to the darkness after having briefly been blinded. When I could see clearly again, I noticed that the werewolf wolfman thing was eating what sure looked like salmon off the end of his stick. I then noticed the smell of cooked salmon as well. Could that have been psychosomatic, or the result of suggestion? I didn't notice the smell until I saw the creature man eating what looked like a hunk of salmon. While eating, he casually informed us that any of these things he had done, both the things he described and the things he demonstrated before our eyes, were things that we could do as well. In fact, he leaned in over the fire to tell us that we were all going to have chances in our lives to do far greater things than he had ever or would ever get to do. Any ability or power he possessed was also possessed in equal or greater amounts by each of us. Then he belched. And some of us laughed. I was too freaked out to even realize that the belch was funny, I don't think. In retrospect, he must have been trying to lighten the mood. But on that night, I was being schooled by a hairy dogman, and I was not feeling very relaxed. Sometimes when I tell people about all of this, they react in awe, saying they wish they had super dogman powers or whatever. My personal reaction was not a positive one. I was feeling as though powers were being thrust upon me that would be accompanied by great responsibilities that I had never actually signed up for. I was a teenage guy. I wanted to get some spiritual guidance, because I lacked that at home. And then, I just wanted a career and a wife. I didn't want to be Spider-Man. I didn't want to have the power to alter people's life paths and so on, as this guy was suggesting. It was sensory overload, and it was mental overload. Too much to think about for me. It kind of still is. Even though I've told this story 1,000,000 times, I can't tell you of one single day that I worked to hone any supposed powers. I'm too scared of the whole thing. If I have truly been given chances to do greater things than that dogman could do, I have not noticed when those chances came up. Maybe they'll happen tomorrow, I can't tell you. So then this weird magic show happened, where the dogman did one thing after another that made no sense at all. I don't know how he did them, but maybe a professional stage magician could have deciphered it. Like one time the dogman was talking to us from the other side of the campfire, and then someone screamed loudly behind us. When we turned around, the dogman was the one screaming, and we had all switched sides around the fire. He was somehow on the side we had been on, and we were somehow on the side he had been on, facing the other way. Now that still makes no sense to me, but somehow he pulled the trick off, like he was David Copperfield or something. He got up and ran toward the woods, returning soon after with a very small young tree that he had pulled up, along with a bunch of dirt. He ran back and replanted it at a small distance from the fire, and asked us who wanted to talk to the tree. It sort of angered me, and I told the guy that he was being illogical. I was still scared of him, but I think fear and anger are two sides of the same thing. So I was frozen in fear until suddenly I was raising my voice in anger. Illogic upsets me, and I told him so. The dogman looked at me with those weird eyes, and somehow, for the first time, I felt empathy and compassion from him. I don't know if he was genuinely projecting those qualities, or if he was somehow tricking me into feeling that, but I felt it. He told me that logic never leads to happiness, and gestured toward the tree. That same empathy I felt from him, I felt myself toward the tree. I patted its dirt down, and I gave it a little bit of my water. I didn't speak out loud, but I felt as though the tree and I were sharing a moment of communication. And of course, that's completely illogical. None of us had cell phones. This was the early 90s. One of my friends in my hometown had a father with a car phone, but that's about all I remember. However, this one kid named Curtis had brought his dad's giant old VHS camcorder, and in the middle of our lessons, he got up and sneaked off to his tent to get the camera. He didn't come back for a long time, and for some reason, none of us seemed alarmed by that. The odd performance continued, until our teacher informed the dogman that we normal humans all needed to get to sleep. The dogman laughed and said something to the effect that now he was the one being taught. Standing and bowing, the dogman backed up into a darker place, and then just didn't seem to be there any longer. It wasn't just that you couldn't see him or hear him. It was also sort of like the very air itself felt different. There was also a kind of exciting buzz when he was there that suddenly was absent from that entire location. That's not to say that we didn't all buzz excitedly for some time after that, comparing our interpretations and theories about what we had just lived through. When we finally retired later that night, we noticed Curtis asleep in the larger tent, his arms wrapped around his dad's VHS camcorder. He had gone to get it, then fallen asleep and missed the rest of the things that the Dogman told us and showed us. So I left that cult group a little while afterward, but they were good for me in the short term, and they weren't jerks about letting me leave as some other groups might have been. In that sense, maybe they weren't a cult after all. I still have my suspicions, but our teacher that night always maintained her innocence of any involvement in what had happened. I personally can only guess as to what that was. I do know that one of the kids in my group went on to become quite successful. I friended him on social media, and he told me that everything the Dogman had told us proved to be true. I didn't know what he meant by that, so I wrote back, asking him to elaborate. That was the last time I heard from him. I don't think he unfriended me, but we haven't had any more conversations. It seems my old buddy took the lessons more to heart than I did on the night when the Dogman spoke to us at length.
Find that link in the description, honey.
The Dogman from the Dog Star. Dear Scary Stories NYC, you'll probably think my story is crazy, and even though it happened to me, I would have to agree with you. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen, or at least that it didn't seem very real to me at the time. This is a story of a time that we lived in horror and fear because of the Dog Star Dogman. My wife and I were married young, but she had a rich father who gave me a job and found us an affordable home. So we were like a middle-aged couple, even in our early 20s. Not many 22-year-olds are concerned with mowing the lawn and paying off a mortgage, but that was how I spent my young adulthood. This was the early 1970s, and my wife didn't work at the time. She does now, part-time, which I find absurd, because I enjoy retirement. We're having a pretty good old age so far, but this is not a story about old age. This is a story about the time when our whole world went completely insane. I was driving myself and my wife, let's call her Enid, home from a business-related party we had attended. It was dark out, and we were both a bit tired. I couldn't wait to get home and go to sleep. Little did I know, we wouldn't be getting home till almost dawn. Enid saw a light in the sky. I didn't think much of it. So what? A light in the sky, big deal, right? But she kept going on about it and gasping about how beautiful it was. I was so tired I just didn't care. Then, the highway we were on took a right turn, and now I was driving in the direction that Enid's window had been facing for the past few minutes. Now I was looking directly at what she had been seeing, and it really blew my mind, as they used to say back in those days. This was not one light. This was a whole bunch of lights. Now, looking back on it, I guess I would compare it with the alien spacecraft in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but that hadn't been made yet when we saw this. It looked like we were viewing the underside of an immense craft, but it was far off in the distance. It was very hard to describe because the thing was irregularly shaped. I guess it was essentially flat on the bottom, but there were all sorts of ridges and grooves and multiple layers of surfaces under there. Also, there were all manner of lights, all different shapes and all different colors, as though we were seeing a city lit up at night, hanging upside down in the sky, off in the distance. It was truly unfathomable, and both Enid and I could do nothing but gasp in awe. I immediately felt a deep sense of fear as we saw a whole lot of little tiny red lights emerge from behind the top of the craft. They went up in the air, then created a formation and headed quickly down in our direction. That was the most paranoid feeling moment of my life. The idea that I saw a vast city-sized aircraft off in the distance, and that city-sized aircraft then dispatched a slew of smaller red flying vehicles or drones directly toward me. That was something that I literally would not have been able to even imagine before it actually happened. It was a very why me moment for me. The next thing I remember, I was driving along and Enid said, "Well, that's a relief." I wondered what was a relief. I felt like I had forgotten something. Enid said it was a relief that the little red spacecraft were gone. Slowly, the images emerged in my memory again. I thought it was strange that I didn't remember them going away. I remember the big craft, I remember the little crafts approaching, and now I'm driving. That was my reality. I chalked it up to being so tired. As we pulled onto our street that night, I noticed the sky seemed to be getting lighter in the east. I asked Enid if she thought there had been a plane crash or an explosion in that direction. She asked why I was asking. I said it was because the sky was lighting up from there. In stunned shock, we both saw the time simultaneously. That was the light from an explosion, all right, but it's the ongoing explosion we call the sun. It was coming up. It was dawn. We had somehow been driving all night. We had been expecting to get home before midnight, so this was more than a small surprise. Fortunately for me, it was a Saturday, so I didn't have to go to work without sleep, but that was one wasted weekend. We tried to get things done around the house, but mainly we slept and argued with each other crankily. Don't witness a UFO unless you want to lose a lot of sleep, take it from me. Sometime during that week, Enid called me at my job to complain to me that we had some kind of weird bear dog on our property and that I should call animal control. I told her that if I called animal control to report a monster, I wouldn't get a very positive response. Still, I was concerned for her safety, and I didn't want her stressing out or feeling in danger, so I knew I would have to do something about it. When I got home that night, I asked Enid to explain to me exactly what happened. She was still clearly shaken up and shook a bit as she spoke to me. Taking me to the large windows in our TV room, she pointed out to the line of trees in the back of the yard. She told me that he was standing there, moving back and forth behind those trees, and that he was staring at her as though he had nothing better to do all afternoon. She felt at the time that the animal was going to break into the house and get at her. She thought that an animal wouldn't invest that much time studying her unless it had some kind of plan in its mind to do something with all this information it was gathering. That kind of made me chuckle that she was ascribing these human qualities to a dumb animal. I asked her to describe its appearance for me, and she got a pencil and some paper. She sketched a drawing while telling me about it. I was expecting to see a drawing of the bear dog that looked like either a bear or a dog, but she drew something that made no sense to me at all. It looked like a hairy man more than it looked like a dog. I thought maybe someone had played a trick on her. "You know, this looks like someone in a Halloween costume," I suggested to her cautiously, observing her reaction. "Exactly," she cried out, "but it's too tall to be a man. It was 8 feet tall if it was an inch." I wanted to laugh, but I shivered instead. She was getting me to believe her, but her story was absurd. There are no 8-foot-tall bipedal dog bears. They just don't exist. If it lives in the forest and it has fur, then it runs on all 4 legs. We don't have primates in the North American forests, and we don't have bipedal dog bears either. I took her to the back door and asked her to walk me out into the yard and show me exactly where the creature stood. This way we could look and see if there was any evidence there. I was hoping we could find evidence proving that it was a prank to calm my wife down, but I wasn't sure exactly what I should be looking for. Enid froze up at the idea of walking toward the forest where that thing had been. She really didn't want to do it. Her fear was clearly genuine. I talked to her calmly and told her it was hours later and that thing was long gone. I reminded her I'd walk with her, and finally she agreed to show me where it had been. We took maybe 5 or 6 steps toward those trees, and we both stopped short as we heard this sound that could only be a deep growling. It was angry sounding, and it shook the ground underneath our feet. It rocked our world to the points that we both ran inside, shivering all over. I was shaking so much that it was hard to run, and it was hard to lock the door once we got inside. We shook as though all the blood had been drained from our bodies, and we were out in the cold Antarctic. If I felt that much fear just from hearing the creature, I could only imagine what my wife must have felt while actually seeing the thing. We held each other and let our emotions out. It was not a very happy moment, but we got through it together. The next morning over breakfast, Enid told me that the monster was related to the UFO experience we had. I almost choked on my coffee. UFO experience? When did we have a UFO experience? Was that like the Jimi Hendrix experience? I got all sarcastic. Enid reminded me of the large craft that emitted the smaller red crafts, and the way we couldn't remember what happened for hours after that. I grew annoyed at her that she was trying to turn lights in the sky into us meeting spacemen or something. I was getting ready for work. I didn't want to hear her fairy stories. All day at work, I felt guilty for having been short with her in the morning. She didn't call me once, and I was afraid to call her. I just hoped that the animal stalker thing had moved on and that we could soon forget about all of this. I bought her roses on the way home and prepared myself mentally for apologizing and focusing on her needs for that evening. As I got home, pulling into the driveway, as if on cue, my wife came running from the backyard, screaming and racing up the driveway. I parked the car, then got out to see what the trouble was, but before I could even get my car door closed behind me, I saw what Enid was running from. It was the dog bear. It had to be, although to me it looked more like a werewolf from the comic books than anything else. It was the size of a very tall man. Maybe it really was too tall to even be a man, as my wife had suggested the night earlier. It was shaggy all over. Not just furry, but shaggy. It was the hairiest animal I had ever seen. It had these very long fangs and the face of a crazy dog. Like a dog that's completely out of its mind, you know? I guess it had a dog nose. It must have, for me and Enid to have both seen it as being some kind of dog. I remember the ears were on top and not on the sides, so it did look like a canine. Its eyes practically glowed in the shadow of where it was standing. That creature and I just looked at each other. It stopped chasing my wife to stare at me, basically. That was essentially what was going on. I don't know what I would have done if it charged me. Maybe I would have tried to get back in the car and lock it. I didn't have to decide, though, because the Dogman just calmly turned and walked off, just like that, gone into the backyard and out of view. I walked on very unsteady legs back to the front door and went inside to find my wife with her face in her hands, weeping. She asked me if I believed her now that the creature was somehow related to that UFO we had seen, and I just held her and agreed with whatever she said. I remembered that I had left the roses in the car. but they seemed more than trite at a time like that. I've even got a name for that stupid thing, she said through tears. I call him the Dog Star, because I think that's where he's from. I'm not sure I had any argument for her any longer on that subject. I mean, I'm not saying I agreed with her that this dog-like bear thing was from outer space, but it shouldn't exist at all, so it's not like she was crazy for taking a guess as to its origin, as much as I tried to brush off the lights in the sky. It was weird how late we got home that night, since I couldn't explain those lights, the missing time, or the crazy animal man that seemed obsessed with Enid. Maybe she was right, and the three things were actually part of one thing. I wanted to do something to make this right, something to get Enid away from that horrible tall dog. I asked her if we should move, then immediately apologized, thinking that was a dumb idea. I mean, if the Dog Star, as she called him, was really from outer space, it would have no trouble at all following us to a new home. I apologized for the stupid idea, but Enid told me that it might be a great idea. What she was thinking was that we should move to an apartment somewhere closer to my work. We didn't have any children yet. We really didn't need all that space or that mortgage. It might make more sense to rent for a few years, and it might make it harder for the dog bear to stalk her if he had to use the elevator to do it. Happy to have a plan in place, I told my lovely wife to pack for a few days. I told her I would find us a hotel room and take her out to dinner. In the car, she found the roses, and that was the best time for her to do so. She stayed in hotels and with friends until I got us the new apartment. I never let her go back to the house again, and she didn't argue very much about that. I took care of the house until it was sold, and I never saw that Dogman once the entire time. I guess it was more interested in Enid than it was in me anyway. We ended up having a family, but we raised them as city kids. Enid never really wanted to go back to the suburbs after the experiences we had. They say these days that if you've had one UFO experience, then you've had a lot of them, and you're still having them. If that's true with my wife and myself, I'm glad that we don't remember any of it. To us, it feels like when we moved to the city, the phenomenon decided to stay in the country. Maybe we're fooling ourselves, but as far as we know, nothing strange has ever happened to us again after the Dogman from the Dog Star. He comes from the Phantom Zone, but he's no Zod. He's a really cool guy named General Zod. Please join me in thanking General Zod for purchasing 2 t-shirts from our merch store. He told me he got the gray one with the skull logo, so I think he means this one right here, the Comfort Tee. Here's an actual photo of the real General Zod wearing the Comfort Tee. You don't have to be an intergalactic supervillain to get one of these either. We have a link in the description for even good and normal Earthlings to order this fine item, and you should hopefully be seeing it under this video as well. Plus, from July 17th through 26, 2024, you can get 20% off by using the code HEATWAVE20 when you check out. Thanks so much, General Zod, and better luck next time with Superman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LSCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.